Hi again. It's your professor, Ann Babson. Um, you're reading Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and I really hope you're enjoying it. I think that it's an interesting story. There are a few things that I would have you notice about Gawain. He is a young man. Let's start there. He is an unmarried man. He is incredibly pretty. He goes off to fight a monster. The Green Knight, who is ostensibly a monster, he is outside of our natural realm. But he does so in what is an impeccably pretty piece of armor. But one wonders how functional armor like this would be facing a basically a green giant who's clearly a senior and seasoned warrior. This is not the green giant's first rodeo, one senses. Now, the green knight has made a very odd proposition to him, one that was hard to take seriously until he walked off with his head underneath his arm, which is that Gawain could cut off his head, and then he would then meet him a year later, um, to hand back to hand himself over to have his own head chopped off. The difference, of course, is that Sir Gawain is immortal like us and can't just walk off with his head under his arm as if he had his hat knocked off. So Gawain shows up and he has all of to the castle at Haut-des-Erles, and he has all of the good manners of a courtier. And people say they want to hear the love talking that they have at the court of King Arthur because they've heard that it's the best. That, in other words, you're going to say all these pretty words. People expect pretty words from him. He shows up looking pretty. But if you wanted somebody to fight off a monster, how much do you really care how pretty he is? And then there is Sir Bertilac and Lady Bertilac, who are, let us admit, a rather odd couple. And something's up with them, is there not? Because Lady Bertilac keeps doing things to try to seduce Sir Gawain. And then Lord Bertilac doesn't invite the male guest out to go hunting with him. What's up with that? That's like you have a guest that you're treating like an honored guest at your house, and you are organizing a pickup basketball game between dudes, and the guy that's staying with you is not invited to come. What is up with that? There is something weird about not inviting him out, but instead telling him to stay home while he goes out and hunts. And they make a weird deal, a really weird deal. Whatever I catch, I'll give to you, and whatever you catch, you'll give to me. It's weird because he's giving kisses to Sir Bertilac, and Sir Bertilac is totally, we find out at the end of the story, been pimping out his wife to Sir Gawain for the purposes of this temptation, which is just way fishy, let's admit. And so he's got to give a couple kisses. Imagine this exchange that takes place in front of Sir Bertilac's retinue, in other words, the people who are in his court. So Sir Bertilac gives him all of the things he's hunted, the dead animals. Imagine for a minute that Sir Gawain had succumbed to the temptation of Lady Bertilac and had sex with her. What the heck is he supposed to do in front of everyone at the castle if he gets the animals and he's keeping with the terms of the exchange? Is he supposed to turn around and bend over? I am saying this just like we're supposed to picture it, and let let Lord Bertilac have his way with him. Is this implied? Is this, in fact, a possible interpretation of this text? We have to ask the question. This book talks about exchanges in a way that evokes the idea of Christian covenant. If you and I make a covenant where we are going to exchange things, we can have that covenant be about anything. And the truth is, Abraham has a covenant with God. And Jesus is the fulfillment of that covenant for Christian thinking. In other words, he redeems us from the original sin of Adam by going to the cross and taking our place. It's like he goes and takes the punishment that ought to have been ours. So we are exchanging places with innocent Jesus, and he is taking our place as guilty us, deserving of punishment. That's the notion of Christian covenant with Christ. And the events of this story take place in Christmas. But it's weird because on one hand, it is a very Christian story. And on the other hand, these folks seem to want to swing. And we have to reconcile ourselves with them somehow. There is a lot of humor in the potential for this to go startlingly homosexual all of a sudden. And even at the end, let us think for a minute about what happens. He takes something from Sir Bertilac's wife that he doesn't give as required by the covenant to Lord Bertilac. It would, in fact, implicate her in a story of adultery, because no man just gets a woman's girdle or any piece of her clothing without getting really close to her and really kind of intimate. If it's something as intimate as, a belt, a girdle would have been a belt. But okay, first of all, he was setting himself up for failure in the system of exchanges of the story by not surrendering what he believes to be a life-preserving magic girdle. But then there is the problem of it's a piece of women's clothing that a pretty man is wearing who has refused to have sex with a woman for possibly incredibly noble but heterosexual motives. That's really quite possible. But it is a piece of women's clothing. Now, in defense of the heteronormativity of Sir Gawain, allow me to say this much. If I were a knight and I were going off to joust in the era that this story is written, I might stop by the stands of people who are watching, which would include many women. And I might go to a noble woman who would, in order to honor me and declare me her champion, she might give me like a scarf, something that I would then tie on my jousting pole or somehow wear in a public display in front of everybody, saying this lady is giving me what were called, in fact, her favors. It was a way of saying she's rooting for me. I'm wearing her team colors. She's giving me the team colors that are hers. But that's not what Gawain does. He is hiding this thing. He is wearing a piece of women's clothing under his masculine symbol of armor. He's a woman inside all there. Or is he? And one of the things he does when he gets to the Green Chapel is he flinches. He chokes, basically. He's not perfectly brave. Now, it occurs to me in practical common sense terms, who wants to stick around and have something like this happen where somebody takes an axe and chops off your head, it would be hard to submit to that. Even if you had a magic thing that would stop you from getting killed. But we ultimately, what's very interesting is that this girdle that he has gotten from Lady Bertilac is a sign of his breaking covenant. It's not a sign of him keeping covenant. And yet when he gets back to Camelot, not only does everybody hail him as a hero, because after all, he did survive something pretty impressive. It's not that he killed the monster, it's that he survived the monster that he went out to fight. And everyone is terribly impressed with him. But he knows better. He has this green girdle that he is wearing as a symbol for him of what ought to be, in his view, his public shame for having screwed up. But the other members of the court of Camelot, the other men, say, no, we'll all put those on. We'll all put those on. Now, what does this mean? Especially since we know the whole story in a way that the Camelot knights would not. First of all, we know how close, in a couple of different ways, Sir Gawain slept with people that by his own moral code he should not have slept with. And number two, we know he wasn't a brave warrior. We know he flinched. Number three, we know that even accepting this girdle to protect himself was not relying on his own strength and what the knights of his day would have called his prowess, his prowess. Everyone else sees him as a conqueror. He knows better. Then there's this other layer that is implied in the very last line of the story. Here is what it says. Maudit soit qui mal y pense. That is a reference to an order of knight that exists to this day. And if you saw the royal wedding with Meghan Markle getting married to Prince Harry, you saw some people possibly if you watch the longer video, who had these like sort of red robes on that were sort of almost like choir robes. They were standing around kind of like ushers telling people where to go. Those people are part of the oldest and most prestigious order of knight that the English have ever had, the Knights of the Garter, that were part of King Edward III's retinue, that they were not Arthurian, but they thought of themselves as Arthurian. And a lot has been said about this reference to them with their, basically the slogan that's on their crest of arms, Maudit soit qui mal y pense, which means cursed be he who thinks ill of this. And they all wore garters, kind of like Gawain wore the girdle outside. And that's why they're called the Knights of the Garter. Garter, sort of, it's not got the sexual connotation exactly that the story has here, but it may be that what we're reading is a critique of King Edward III's practice of, supporting knights who were maybe immoral, but we don't even really know that. What we do know is that the garter means something different to Gawain than it means to the court at Camelot. That the private realization that Gawain has, that he has screwed up, that he has not been as good as he meant to be, that being pretty has not prepared him for the real challenges of being a knight in a morally murky landscape. And that's, I think, one of the great strengths of this story that makes it endure, is that we understand that Gawain is a flawed hero, but the people around him just see him like a legendary hero, that we really understand that the legend, including the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of Camelot, cannot be realistically fulfilled because we screw up. And being Christ-like, if this is in fact a Christian story, and you can have a big debate about that, but if this is a story about Christian covenant, that we are certainly the flawed party in need of grace, because Christ could be perfect in what he's doing, but we are flawed. Thank you.